Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of Baobab Chats. It's season 2, and we are still going, and we're trying to just continue on our usual highs. So today I'm joined by a very able panel uh, with my good friend Tandiwe, all the way from Port Elizabeth, from Cape Town. Jesus Christ, all the way from Cape Town. And I'm also joined by my good friend Pastor Nigel in Glasgow, Scotland. So yeah, we're going to have a very, very, very interesting conversation today, and there is no better way to talk about this than just gather under the baobab tree, and we get to interact. Grief is one of life's long enemies, coupled with death. We've been in a very, very dark cloud from 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. And death has also been with us since time immemorial. So just to sit down today and talk about this age-old enemy and this nemesis that we have to face every day as Africans, we have our own ways in the past that we have dealt with the loss of loved ones and the loss of a neighbor or the loss of a colleague. We've also have had instances to borrow from certain cultures on how to deal with loss of loved ones, from burials to the grieving process. Today, we want to talk about that from a bit personal basis to say how have you gone through this in lives and what are the tools we have had. I want to put out a disclaimer as we start the show today that uh, while what we're talking about is going to be personal and detailed, this is not grief, and a personal loss cannot be sort of solved on a step by step. This is not a step by step solution to dealing with grief and the loss of loved ones. You, however, have avenues so that are professional that you can go through and get professional help and family and friends to talk to. Tandy, where Nigel? Sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. I think from the beginning, let me share with you how I think I'm going to be sharing my experiences of grief from three avenues, or having lost three categories of people. The first one is my grandmother, who was like a mother to me. She's the one who raised me up, and she passed away in 2005. And then the second one is my brother, who passed away in 2016 in September. And then the third category, several losses of children, specifically my own children. Uh, so those are the three categories that I will share as we share our experiences. I'll be referring to in how I've dealt with those. Um, so I think those are the three categories that I'm going to be sharing when we share. Tandy, where you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Paul, for having me on the show. Hi, everyone. Thank you for following Baobab Chats. Today, we are going to talk about the death and dealing with a loss of loved ones and grief. And I think it's a very, very relevant and valuable conversation to have during this dark time that we are in. And I know that it's a very sensitive subject, like Paul mentioned. It's a very, very sensitive subject to talk about, especially now that we are so vulnerable. Everyone is almost lost someone that they know. So we all don't want to talk about, and the fact that we don't know, we've got so many versions of what happens after death, and we've got so many people who we are losing today, and we've got no clue or any idea still of how to deal with the loss, the proper way of dealing with the loss of loved ones. So I don't want to, like Nigel, go into my personal stuff, because I'll end up breaking down in front of everybody. So I just prefer to generalize things like I view them from the disparate, different aspects of life, based on religion, based on the regional areas of the world, based on cultures and different cultures, how all those deals with death, and how we can find a common denominator or a common thing that we can all say this is right, or this is a approved way of dealing with death, and how we can use it to our personal situations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. Just out here, we are going to have an additional to this panel who's going to join us at any given point, who's a social worker, and we'll also try and give us a perspective from a professional point of view. Let's take it to recent events. All over the world, there's been lockdowns and travel restrictions and all those other things just to contain the situation we've been dealing with. Well and good. Just to make it a bit more personal, like I'm going to be today, I lost an aunt in the lockdown period, and she's someone that I've grown with. She partly raised me as well, but now because of the lockdown, I could not travel to go to the funeral, and we could only grieve from the confines of our homes and have video calls and all those sort of things. The process, inception of death, and you lose a loved one. Let's say you lose a loved one today. One of the first things we jump into is the funeral part. The funeral plays a role where you come in and you say your last goodbyes and your last respects. So with the COVID lockdowns, most people failed to do that. And I remember speaking to someone elderly who was saying he felt guilty because he was not allowed to travel to pay his respects to his elderly brother as well, and all that. And I think with that comes a lot of psychological and physiological problems in not having that chance to go and say our last goodbyes. Where we are sitting at today, is this the new way we should be having funerals, to say? Because recently they've been allowing people here in South Africa, I think at least 50 people at a funeral, which means there's a certain group of people only now allowed to go and pay last respects at a funeral. You look all over the world, some people do that already, but here in Africa, the whole village has to go to the funeral, the whole community to go to the funeral. I'll relate this to anybody who's ready for it.
Yeah, I must say it's tough. I recall back when my grandmother died. She was sick, she was old. And I think at that time she died in the house, and she died in the house, and it was a tough time. If you remember, in 2005, I think at that particular phase in time in Zimbabwe, there was no fuel. Fuel was a challenge, and so she died outside town, which was about 30 kilometers from Chinhoyi. And I think what was painful to begin with for me was I was in the town Chinhoyi, and we had to organize her body out of the house, and it took longer than one would expect. And I think with that in mind, it's almost like similar to what is happening now. Of course, people were within the vicinities, neighbors and stuff who were consoling my mom and so forth. But it was already a tough thing, because for us, and for me specifically, having heard the message, the immediate thing I had to deal with was to say, okay, how do we arrange to take away the body from the house before we make any other arrangements? And of course, you would understand that I think like now with COVID, people were restrained to travel because of fuel and because of the economy and so forth. And I think when such things happen, they already begin to, for me, it presented a challenge where I didn't have to deal with the death immediately, but I had to deal with other things, like dealing with the problem of taking the body out of the house, and then of course organizing to see to it that the body is put in a cold room and so forth. And I think now, looking at now and what is happening now, where people are actually restrained from traveling to be part of organizing the funeral and other things, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that delays the grieving process, or how to deal with the actual loss that has happened. And at the end of the day, you're having to deal with side things as compared to the actual death, and then you find yourself having to to struggle. And I think when I look at the current situations where we're finding ourselves in right now with COVID-19, it's tough, because we need closure. We need to see that person who has died as a way of saying goodbye, and as a way of having closure of some sort. So I think just like it was in 2005 for me, it's pretty the same as it is now in 2021, where we are having to find ourselves struggling with the whole concept of saying, now that we are not allowed to have closure, how do we deal with things? And I think how I have personally dealt with it is you face it head on. I had to face it head on and deal with the things that I had to deal with at that particular time, and of course delay the grieving process, or how to deal with that pain. So that is how it was. It was for me with my grandmother, and just trying to relate it with what is happening now.
That I would not live with myself. I mean, like I said, I will end up breaking down if I hear such issues. But I think it all goes down to show how strong we can be, and how far we can be tested to see how strong we can be. I mean, if being strong is the only option that we have, that's the only thing that we have to do. And I think the fact that we cannot go home to bury our relatives.
I'm actually reading a comment here on Facebook, and I'm going to relay back to you, Tandiwe. But there's this Letimuko who's saying here, the worst eyewitness is when a friend failed to go bury her own husband from SA to Zim due to restrictions. And I'm trying to think while I'm listening to you, this is intense, and you can carry on. You can carry on.
No, I can't carry on. Like I'm saying, it's really tough. It's really, really tough. And especially if you can't go to bury someone that you love, it's like being hit twice or being robbed twice, because first you have to deal with the fact that the person is gone. You're going to be on your own. And then secondly, you don't have that closure to see someone you love go down and actually pay the last respects. It actually gives you healing and closure. It contributes to your closure. So in actual fact, in African cultures, I'm thinking it's a taboo actually, because the way we used to practice our funerals and the loss of our loved ones, the whole process from Nyaradzo until the last processes, it's something that we as Africans value the most. And this concept of burying in absence is actually maybe adopted like sort of from West cultures, because Western people, when they look at funerals, they don't look at this sacred part of it. Maybe I'm wrong, but the way I see it, like, have you watched many movies? I think there's one. There was this short guy. I don't remember the title of the movie. It was Death at a Funeral. You can see that it's all materialistic. They don't have that value of the soul that is departed, but all the focus on is the quality of the coffins, the quality of the flowers, the life insurances. After that, you see, they can even cremate someone and then someone can just stay in a container. But in African cultures, it's not something that we are used to. And many African countries, we are so religious. We follow the Abrahamic religious type. Some of us are Christians, and in the book of Genesis, death is mentioned there, and it's something that is introduced maybe as a punishment of what Eve and Adam did, and then they don't value the body itself, because according to the book, the body is made out of clay, and the soul is what God actually breathes into the person. And when someone passes away, God takes out the soul and back to heaven. And also there's a concept of judgment in those Abrahamic religions, to say if you were doing good, and then you're gonna be in heaven.
That before we even get to where we became religious, which is something almost very foreign to us as Africans. We had African traditions that governed how we dealt with death per se. And I want to quickly point out, because I've seen different African cultures deal with the funeral aspect in many different ways. Where I'm coming from, a funeral can last for as far as between 3 to 4 days, while the people are just making the person linger. They want to try and hold on to the person as long as they can, while the body is still in a decent form. And you find in other cultures, it's actually a whole week here in Africa, where the people are trying to sit down and share the memory of the deceased, and talk and encourage each other in the atmosphere of the deceased. At that time, the deceased car is still parked in the yard. The deceased clothes are still in the wardrobe. Nobody has taken anything out yet. We try and hold on to the atmosphere of the dearly departed. And what you were mentioning there, Thandiwe, also has a bearing on us, because we've moved into different cultures now. I'm talking with you from Cape Town, and my good friend is in Glasgow, in Scotland, where funeral processes are now different from what we're used to. So we then begin to look at things differently. I have a relative who lost a loved one from the UK, and even though our culture calls us to be there, she could not. It's actually a dad who passed away. She could not travel to the funeral to bury her own dad. And as we saw here, someone couldn't travel to her husband's funeral. Does this call us to rethink the way, because values and cultures are there for a reason, but we also agree when we sit under the baobab that certain traditions and values are worth challenging. So while we're sitting here and challenging and interrogating these things, is this a wake-up call to say we need to upgrade our cultural systems when we look at funerals, so that a good friend who is being restricted from traveling to an actual funeral does not carry a level of shame and betrayal on their part in failing to travel?
I would like to think that times have changed and times are changing. And I think 2020, 2021 has taught us something else as well. I want to linger a little bit on what you spoke about in terms of the length of grief, or from death until burial. And say, I mean, my experience here, having been in Scotland for nearly two years now, and being involved with the process of helping others in grief and burial and stuff. I think there's value in my conviction and in my own experience when we spend time. Of course, sometimes it's the processes we are doing and the things that we are doing, but I think when we spend 3-4 days or a week, there's time that we are allowed to be sober again, or we are allowed to deal with the pain. And by the time we say our goodbyes, be it through burial or be it through cremation, like what is happening in modern times now and in some places, I think that time frame is very important. And it's important because it gives you time to be emotional, over emotional sometimes, and sometimes you get a grip of things as you reflect back into what has happened and how you have journeyed with a particular person. Now, secondly, when you come to the aspect of failing to be to bury someone, or to be at a funeral service or a memorial service for someone, I think we need to understand that it's tough. especially during COVID time. In some countries, I gather that people are saying, people are saying a person has to be buried within a space of a day or two, which is tough. And I think, I don't know how it is like for those who are losing loved ones and having to deal with that, because sometimes you need the time. You need the time between the death itself and the burial, or when you say your goodbye, because you need to allow a process of crying, a process of dealing with those unimagined emotions that we deal with. So I think people need to realize that, I think, in as much as life is that important and we are important to each other, sometimes being there physically to say goodbye uh, is not always inevitable to happen because of situations and scenarios that we find ourselves in. But I think it's okay. We are moving in modern times. That's why we do have videos. We do have, people can take a video and you can see the person in a coffin or wherever it is, and try to deal with the loss and your closure that way.
I think what it takes us back to, as you rightly mentioned, Pastor Nigel, is that mourning phase is really important. Before we even get to the grief part, the mourning phase during the funeral, where you're actually still experiencing the shock of the loss, is really important, and it brings the aspect of counseling and professional assistance, because we're used to saying, okay, because I've been able to mourn, I'm gonna be okay. And before I revert back to you, Pastor Nigel, I'm gonna throw this one to Tandiwe, because as a lady, as a woman, I think we you experience differently the pain of loss as men. As men, we are told to hold our emotions and keep our emotions in check. I've been to many funerals, and you find men just trying to talk things out and talk about their lessons. Men just find stuff to talk about. But when I remember having to go and spot a relative who was a lady, the whole trip was a mess because she was screaming and yelling and shouting and screaming, and you know what I'm talking about. She was a total mess. The guys there were just calm and composed. Uh, how do we say deal with this aspect of mourning at a funeral in a different level? Because now you see, with men they can contain it and deal with it at a later day, but with women they actually have to be there and pour out their emotions all out.
Firstly, I would like to agree on the points that you and Pastor mentioned earlier on, to say that we are living in a modern world that is changing almost on a daily basis. Like in each century, we've got changes that are like technological developments that are now assisting us to do things that we didn't do before, like, for example, video calling and Skyping and stuff. So we didn't have those things back then, but as centuries goes on, we learn to develop, theories are developed, scientific facts are developed, and we grow. But death is something that is very, very solid. The birth and death of people, it's something that has been with us since the beginning of time, but we don't have solutions yet. We don't have theories to define, to give us answers. It's still the same process. Like we had Albert Einstein, those guys, they were very intelligent, but they had to go through that same process of death. So it's something that we don't have answers to. That's why it's very, very difficult to talk about. So in as much as we would want to say that there is a certain way that we must modernize death, or a certain way that we must mourn, or women are mourning differently to men, I believe that death, it all depends on how close you are to the person that is passed on. For some, like distant relatives and distant people, it's easier for you to move on. But when it comes to someone you love, I think we all deal with it differently. And the way that we approach that problem, no matter how factual we want it to be, to say this person is passed on, the fact is that the person is not going to come back. We might take the scientific approach to say it's brain dead, cardiac, the person is not going to come back. But at the end of the day, when that person is close to you, it does, that scientific fact goes away. It's irrelevant. It becomes so personal, and the fact that you love that person and the person is gone, you start to have that that darkness in front of you, because you're so confused. You don't know what's going to happen now without that peace in your heart. And that person, when the person is gone, the part of your heart dies, and you've got no clue whatsoever. But I think time has got a way of doing these things that I don't know. But like I said, I know we don't have answers. No one knows everything. And it's something that we try to avoid. Like, it's something that happens every day. Like, according to WHO statistics, almost 150,000 people die every day. But it's something that we don't talk about. But it's now a subject that we talk about the first thing in the morning, the first in the afternoon, and the last thing at night, because of Corona. So because of Corona, it's something that we have to talk about, and we have to find answers. And so I thank you guys for bringing this on, so that we can have different views from different perspectives. Thanks.
When
I wanted to comment, Paul, on what you said about women grieving differently from men, and I want to say, I think almost, from my own experience, it's almost like of course a taboo in that sense. But I think there is no defined roles or ways in which people should grieve. I've often heard, just like you said, people say that men should not cry, women should cry, and so forth. And I want to differ with that. When my grandmother died, I was sobbing, I was crying, I was screaming. And I think to some extent, culture has defined it this way for us, that, when it comes to men should hold it up together, and they should avoid crying in public and things like that. And I think I want to suggest, out there and say, I don't know what works for you, but for me, if it's someone that I love dies, I sometimes I can cry, I can scream, because basically what it is to me is I'm expressing, that's the way I'm on. You find that one day I will cry like nobody's business, and the next day I will be quiet like nobody's business. Sometimes I want to talk a lot. So the notion, so to speak, that we used to within our African culture that says men don't cry, we leave that to women. I think to some extent, some of us, I can almost relate to my own experiences when I lost my daughter. That people would be expecting that men don't cry, and unfortunately for some, they had to see me cry, and I had to cry. At some point I had to cry privately, and at some point I had to cry, openly. So the notion of saying men don't cry, I think sometimes it actually takes us back in terms of our grieving process itself. But I think we all express, like Tandy was said, we all express ourselves the way we feel right, because we are grieving, we are mourning. And in a true sense, that is how life is.
I cannot add anything to what you just mentioned here, Pastor Nigel. It's really
Sure.
as depth should go. And while we are continuing the conversation, I wish this is where we had an ad break, just to deal with this.
True.
The probably would be able to deal with. When we set out to have this conversation, it was very intentional that we have it this way, because we knew it would be as difficult as it is. That notwithstanding, these are things we need to talk about. These are things we need to put out. And I appreciate what you said when you said there is no right and wrong way of dealing with mourning. You mourn the way you feel like mourning at that time, and there is no prescribed way of mourning. Fortunately, there is no scientific order to it. So you wouldn't be breaking any rules if you decide to mourn the way you feel. I want us to take this a little bit further away from here, because it will really make us have to break the show out. Um, when I was 12, I lost my dad. And one of the things that happened is, I mourned my dad because he was really close to me. He was that close up to today. My daughter put up his picture on my fridge. It's been there for 2 months. But anyway, because we still speak about him. But when I was 12, I felt like I'd mourned my dad. Fast forward 3 years later, I still remember 3 years later, I was sitting behind the house, crying like a lunatic. You know that cry that you cry when you're alone with neighbors and all sorts of funny things. And it talks to how the grief part continues beyond the mourning phase, where everybody has gone home and everybody thinks you're okay. And inside of you, the memory of the person and the love that you shared with the person doesn't go away with burial. And this is something we really don't comprehend and we fail to realize, which is okay. And it has to be like so for a reason, because the person is dear to you. You do not lose friendship because someone has traveled overseas. You also don't lose friendship because someone has been translated into the next life. So I'm going to I've heard people say you need to let go of the person. I did not let go of my friendship with you, Pastor Nigel, because you're in Scotland today. I did not let go of friendship with my dad because he's in the next life. So I think the idea of people saying, let go of the person to me and move on does not really work well. What I can relate with, and I want to put in the African culture in this context, is the idea that we accept the person is not with us here. However, we can still value and cherish the memory of the person. In our African cultures, you find that we had ceremonies. I'll pick off my culture specifically. A month after the burial, people gather around to talk about the testament, the will, and they talk about how the deceased wanted his estate shared. And we then deal with the clothes in the wardrobe and the spare wheel in the garage and all these sorts of things. We feel that we have had permission from the deceased. Now we're hearing the deceased final word to say, while I was living, this is who I thought of, and this is what I thought of them, and this one should get this. A year later, we gather back around in our African culture to say we are bringing back the spirit of the dead into the homestead. People gather around. In some cultures, they gather around for a week. In some, they brew beer and make all sorts of noises to say, we want the dead back with us. We want the dead to overlook and have oversight over us. And this is in our African cultures. I think for me, this process brought some level of connectivity that we are not allowed in certain religions. And we should deal with counseling with on that regard, because now you have that sense that this person might have been gone, but they're still alive somewhere. And it sort of endears you more to the person. I'll take this through to you, Pastor Nigel.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said from the beginning, I share sentiments of my losses in using just three categories: losing a daughter or children, secondly, losing a brother, and thirdly, losing my grandmother. I think the grief process is not, it doesn't take a day. It doesn't take months. It doesn't take a year. It takes a long time. Sometimes, for some, just to accept that this person is dead, truly gone, might take them years. And for some, it will take them years to accept the fact that, oh, they are finally gone, maybe after 5 years. And I would love to put it out.
We are going to go for a quick ad break, but I want you to hold and put a thumb onto what you were saying now, just so that we go and refresh it. We still need someone to powder my nose. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
Hi everyone, my name is Mbai Chinai. Today I just want to challenge myself and someone who might find this useful. COVID-19 continues to be a threat to us all, and I've been reflecting that the best that we can do for one another, especially in these moments, is to be there for each other, offering each other support. It goes a long way just checking out on an old friend, on our dear loved ones. And I would like to encourage myself and encourage others as well that may we find time just to call, text, and find out how our dear loved ones are doing, wherever that they may be. I understand we all live these lives, and at times we just don't have time. But I think, especially in these times that we are faced with, someone would be grateful if we call, if we give them a text just to check how are they doing. It will definitely go a long way. I don't have much to say, but I just want to say, let's keep in touch. Let's just find time to check out on others, find out how they are doing. You don't know what someone is going through. Maybe someone is battling with all the effects of COVID-19. It has affected people in various ways. Someone might not have gotten sick from COVID-19, but it has definitely brought so much effects to families, to people around us, and it's definitely impacting all of us. So let's find ways just to check out on others, to be there for each other. Thank you.
Welcome back. And yes, if you are just joining us wherever you're watching from, it could be Facebook or YouTube channel, on Instagram. We are talking about dealing with loss, the loss of loved ones, obviously, and how to deal with the grief that comes with that. And rightly say there, keep your masks on. While we do all what we have to do with what we're doing, let's still follow on the COVID protocols. Pastor Nigel, I had to put your thumb on something very interesting you were saying, so you can take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you to our listeners and our viewers. Yes, I was sharing something about the length of the grief process or mourning phase, and saying, sometimes it takes a year or even more than a year to accept that someone is dead and gone. So I think because that is the case, we need to realize how diverse it might be for people and for different people. We have lost pregnancies, which for us are children. We have had a stillbirth, and amongst those, one of the things that helped me, I'm reading some of the comments. One of the things that helped me to deal with that loss was, getting a platform where I could share my feelings. I was in Rustenburg in South Africa at that particular time, and I attended a grief share. A grief share is, for those who don't know, it's just a platform where people who have lost loved ones, it's like a support group, where people who have lost their loved ones will come together, and they are guided through their grieving process. And during that time, for me, I discovered many things about myself. I discovered how, to some extent, I was even causing pain to my spouse, not knowing, because unfortunately, because of where our cultures and where we're coming from, we're not taught how to listen. We're not taught how to be sensitive, and whether even to just take time to realize that, when you're facing the same grief, you've lost the same person, you, two different people, husband and wife, will respond to it differently. So for me, the grief share and coming to a place where we talked about loss actually helped me big time. And I think I still go back to some of the notes or some of the material that I got from that time in 2013, to actually refer to some of those things, and they still fit into my life today. And that's, I think, I'm just trying to respond to one of the questions that someone on Facebook asked: how did you deal with loss, and how were you helped? So that's one way in which I was helped. But in that itself, I could go on to share how I discovered, how I was causing pain to my wife, and how friends who were trying to be nice and to be supportive were actually causing pain to me, and how over the time and over the long time, sharing my feelings about my loss and how I wanted to deal with certain things actually could help those who were trying to help me to grieve or to deal with the loss as well. So I think basically that is how I got help in this regard.
Wow. There's a question that just popped up quickly. I think it was from Stanford, who was asking that, how do we help? It brings also the question of the right way to support those grieving, especially in 2020 to 2021. I think in these instances, and this is not a professional, it's just my opinion. What I would have preferred in my times of loss, because 5 years later I lost my mom, and I was still, I think I was 17 in that time. And what worked for me
Yeah.
was you have someone just sit down and allow me to speak of who the person was. Very often we don't have people listening, we have people answering us back to say, you
Yeah.
need to move on. God has got a way, and what and who. And I think the most important thing for me at that time was just to have someone listen to me explain the craziness of the memories we shared and the things we did. Just up to today, just talking about how I usually highlight this. My dad, I think when I was in grade 4, made me write an essay between a toad and a frog. He's the man who put me into being an academic. So when I speak about this to my kids and I say, my dad used to say this, and they listen, it carries through that process from just being grief to a level of connectivity as I'm passing on a legacy from his side to the next generation. So I think we need to encourage, especially in this past year and this year, that people need to be allowed to speak, and those who care and those who want to have a helping hand or a hand or a shoulder for someone to cry on, the best way, in my opinion, I would prefer to have it done is just to allow the person to speak and share their memories, and not be prejudicial and already have an answer, and just be quiet and laugh with them. Anyway.
Paul and Nigel, thank you. I think this is my first time actually breaking down in a show. I feel like I'm having this internal breakdown. I don't know what's going on, but it's really not good. I don't usually feel this way, and I know that we have never had a break before in our shows, but today things are just different, and like like everything, when I was preparing for this show, it was just the theoretical part of it. I look at death in a different way. And I didn't know Nigel before this show, and he didn't tell me about this. No one told me about this. And now I'm coming to this show and he's sharing everything. So I'm trying to contextualize it and understand what he's going through. And I'm thinking everything that I was thinking about is not relevant anymore, because it's like an insult to him, because I don't understand what he went through, and I don't know what he went through. And in as much as he's gonna say I lost 3 people, to me and to the rest of the world, is one big thing that happened to him, which was death of 3 people. And we think that this just happened and then he just dealt with it and then moved on. But those 3 deaths are 3 different things. It affects you. I'm sure that's how I'm feeling. It affects you differently. With each person, it's different. It's a different story. It's a different experience with each person, and it's something that you don't have answers to. You don't know how to approach it. And like Paul was saying, I think it's really important if you can have someone to just listen to you, just sit there and be there and just listen. So I don't know, Nigel, what was the proximity of the loss of these people? How far apart were they, and what were the causes? Sorry, if you can share with us.
Yeah, I think well, it's a period of between 5 to 7 years of losing children. And I mean, I want to comment as well on what Paul said about people. I mean, I think it has been put out. I'm a pastor, and I want to say this, and I think I didn't want to be called a pastor at this platform, because I'm coming as Nigel. And I think one of the things that was very painful for me when I lost Shalom, the girl we lost through stillbirth. One of the painful things that I don't forget is when someone came to me and they wanted to preach to me, and they wanted to quote some verses to me, and say to me that, you know what, God cares and God knows. And I think that made me fume. That made me go mad and crazy. And I remember very well, clearly saying to some people, you know what, please don't preach to me. And I think and I think as a result, I respect and I love, now that I serve, I respect and I love the way time, time of losing someone and time of burial, the period in between, I treat that with care when I reach out to people, be it family or be it congregants, because that's a very critical time. Like Paul said, the people that you remember the most are the people who come and they simply listen to you, and they simply come and allow you to say out what's in your heart and how you're feeling. For me, I was offended by church people who were caring for their pastor, and trying to be there for me, but the model and the way they were doing it was not right for me. And I think hence, when I deal with friends and people, I'm very overcautious, and I am very overcautious because I know that you can say one word that can offend someone, or that can destroy somebody's well-being as they are grieving or as they are suffering the loss of a loved one. Even in 2021 and 2020, you may find that you're wanting to be there for someone, and actually by words that you say or the way you actually express yourself, some people like to say, you know what, they've gone to be with the Lord, and they think that is Christian enough to be carrying someone through. And one of the favorite passages people want to say is the Romans passage, where nothing will separate us from the love of God and blah blah blah. And people love to quote that. And I think, not that I want to prescribe to people, but I would advise from my own experiences to say, sometimes the best that you can give to a friend or to a loved one, even loved ones who have lost the same person as you have, is just to be there for them, and sometimes listen to them. And sometimes one of the tools that I've gained from attending a grief share was to actually get to be advised. I think people would want to say this is a Western thing, but I think it can also be an African thing, when you actually get to take time, especially when you've lost a child or you've lost your parents, to actually write. These days we've got Facebook, we've got WhatsApp. You can write to your friends and say, friends, I'm going to be different in the next 2 years or 2 weeks or whatever, because I am suffering the loss of someone. And if I get to be not in the mood of talking, don't force me to talk. If I get to be quiet, please understand this is where I am at. And it's a process, even today, with my wife. I mean, we recently got a little boy in December last year, and I think even now, when we look at our newborn son, there's a lot of connection that comes through, and I mean, sometimes it's the simple things, sometimes it's the small things, as small as even getting to say a friend who is celebrating their own, baby, um, and you have lost one, and they send you a pic that can offend you. Or maybe they want to visit you at a time when you've just lost a child and you don't want to see a child. So I mean, there are no prescriptions, do's and don'ts, but I think it's like Tandiwe said, it's a very sensitive area where people need to tread carefully, because sometimes people think losing a brother is simple, but the way you connect to a brother and losing a parent, for some, I mean, I lost my father, but if I was to weigh between losing a father and losing my grandmother, they are two different. I was more closer to my grandmother. I still, suffer a lot from having lost a father, but the two cannot be put together. So I think that's another dynamic. I don't want to to keep talking. I want to give others a chance, but I just thought that those points that Paul said are very key and important.
And I think what you just mentioned here, Pastor Nigel, brings us to it's unfortunate that time is not on our side always because of the rich content that we all have to put out here. And our clock is ticking. I'm going to give each one of you guys a minute each max just for your last remarks. But before I do that, I appreciate the courage that it took just to sit down here. I remember when you brought this about, I was like, no, I don't want to be the one who's going to do it because I feel like this death has been so personal to me, and you can never have death. Death is just as raw and as crude and as isolating and as painful. And when it happens to someone else, this is how I've dealt with it myself. Just quickly in 30 seconds, I set my kids down and I explained to them what would happen if I were to die. In my faith, I will be with the Lord, which is something no one has to remind them. And I will be able to hear and see what they do based on the teaching of our Lord Jesus on Abraham and the rich man. But they are not allowed to speak to me based on the teaching of the faith I am in. So, in a way, we owe it to ourselves to prepare our loved ones of this uh, day that will eventually come. It's just like when I'm going to go on an overseas trip, I also prepare my family that I'm going out for a week, and then this is what is going to happen. This is where you get the milk, this get the bread, and this is how you pay the bills. So I think it is important to have these conversations in a good and well set up environment for people of different ages to understand it the way they must understand it. I'm going to come to you, Tandiwe, just for a maximum of a minute because our time has been ticking on the red side. Just to give you parting shots.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nigel, once again, and thanks everyone. I think in our lives, like every day, there is this space, there's this time frame that we go to be on our own for self-evaluation and self-judgment, where we think about ourselves before we become part of the family, before we become part of the society that we are in. So I think it is in that space that when someone we love passes away, it is in that valuable, vulnerable space that we go through and we go to and we start questioning, we start getting, there's confusion, there's denial in that space. And sometimes we end up blaming ourselves to say, if I had done this, maybe things wouldn't have gone that way. But we have to understand that death is something that is natural, unavoidable and permanent. It's something that has been there, and I don't think it's gonna end or whatever, but it's something that is gonna carry on. And like Nigel said, you start to question yourselves, you start to question your faith, your Christianity, your well-being when such times comes. But what I want just to encourage is that people should just confront it. I know it's like what you guys were mentioning earlier on. There's no way that we can prescribe or to say this is the right way, but let's just be there for each other, like Wimbai was saying. Be there, just come, go there and listen and sit. Let the person talk to you rather than having that internal destructive conversation to themselves. Let it all come to you. Just sit and listen, even if you don't have anything to say. So I think it is important that we are in social groups and we are with people that we love during this time, and let's be there to support each other.
It's true. Thank you. I would also like to say it's 2021 is tough, and people are isolating. People are locked down in their doors. I think I loved when we took a break, Vimba encouraging that let's check on each other. And I think as we check on each other, we never know, a good intended gesture can be read otherwise. I think take your time and invest time. Young people, invest time in finding out how best, especially amongst your friends, how best to be there for your friends when they need you, because sometimes we think we are being there when in actual fact we are actually causing more harm. But if we communicate and we say to them, hey, how best can I be there for you, I think we will get the best.
All right. Yeah, that was me just being the producer on the other side of the line. But yes, thank you so much for all this. Hey, this was a heavy one. Hey, I done.
I don't want to come back to this topic.
But yeah, it's our goodbyes from the Baobab Chats and team. We're all saying here, this is how Africa has to deal with these issues. Thank you, Pastor Nigel. Thank you, Thandiwe, for availing yourselves and exposing yourselves the way you did. From all of us, oh yeah, just a quick one. We will be having Thandiwe on a special segment that will be running, I think, on a weekly basis on Baobab Chats. We're going to have a Legal Matters show also continuing here on Baobab Chats. So stay tuned with all our updates and everything we're posting out there. Share with a friend. We are trying to shape, we're not even trying, we're actually making an effort to shape Africa to be the Africa.
Hi guys, it's Thandiwe again. Thank you for following Baobab Chats. And you know what, guys, I've been thinking a lot about the stigma that goes around health issues in our society. Like today, there is so much stigma and discrimination when it comes to HIV. This has been going on for a long time. But when it comes to coronavirus, guys, I want to urge us to be open and to discuss these things with our family, with our friends. Because if we keep it secret, we don't know the next person that you're infecting. And there is no discrimination to this disease, things that you cannot control. So don't be shy about it. Don't feel free to and be open to talk about coronavirus. Feel free to talk about it with your friends. Feel free to talk about with your families and the health providers. I know so many governments have developed health facilities and health applications so that you can get advice, and don't listen to conspiracy theories. Stick to facts. If you don't know, rather Google and cross-check the information that you're receiving. And I just wanted to encourage you guys not to hide behind your closed doors and to feel free about it. If you have COVID, disclose it to your family, to your friends, so that they know how to keep themselves safe. No one is going to discriminate against you. You are not the one who started with this disease, and you're not going to be the one who ends it, but you can end the chain that continues within you. So let's be safe and let's keep it safe, guys. Thank you for following Baobab Chats and keep subscribing. Thank you.